Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today, our very special guest is Jessica Harris, and Jessica is the president of Harris Energy Solutions, also could be called HES. It's sort of like a combination of hers and hims, or I don't know, something, or it's missing the R. And hello, Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Sean. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet everyone. Hi.
Yeah, Jessica is off in Austin right now, and Jessica is an engineer. And where did you go to school for engineering, Jessica?
New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm a mechanical engineer.
And you didn't pick up a crazy accent there?
I don't know. Maybe I've lost it. I've been down here in Texas for about 8 years. So,
Is that where you're from, New Jersey?
yep, New Jersey.
Okay. Maybe you watch a lot of movies and Hollywood kind of gives you the more generic accent, or I'm from California, so I just think it's not an accent, but what do I know? All right. So you're an engineer and you have an engineering firm and you specialize in solar and storage, I guess. And how many engineers do you have working at your engineering firm right now?
Actually, we've grown pretty dramatically in the last 3 years. I think we're up to 23 this week, technically. Yeah, it's really grown very quickly. And we really do more energy consulting, not so much energy engineering, but within the consulting, we are definitely more technical than other consultants.
So maybe you could explain to people, because a lot of people here are just kind of learning the basics and stuff. Like, what's the difference between energy engineering and consulting? And why do you have a prime number of 23 engineers? Is that including you?
Yes.
Okay. Why a prime number of engineers? I guess primes are special. So that's one good thing.
I'm going to have to hire someone immediately because it's not even, you're right.
Uh-huh.
So if anyone's listening, wants a job, but the consulting really, it has to do with how you actually set up your firm, right? When you have an engineering company, you need to have a PE that's the owner. I'm actually working on getting my PE. Hopefully that's a couple months out.
And so let's just mention too, that means professional engineer. And that's a license that you can get for your state. And also you probably took a PE class when you were in high school.
Yes.
Physical education. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I got you. I was much better at that.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
Don't sell yourself short.
But not only that, engineering is like very strict. The insurance on that is very different. It's a kind of a totally different structure than consultants. And I really think if you look at what we do, the consultant kind of narrative fits us a lot better. We kind of think out of the box. We kind of see the whole picture, where I think sometimes like design engineers, that's what typically what an engineering firm is, they get very locked in on what they do. While we are constantly doing new things, we're incorporating different projects. A lot of the things we kind of work on is energy master plans or energy audits, different ways to kind of look at things where, I think it's like, not that we're more open-minded, I don't mean to like bash any design engineers, but that's kind of the consultant flavor that I think a lot of people need. They don't have that expertise in all these areas on what is decarbonization, what makes sense for my building, my township, etc. And then we're kind of like that bridge between the contractors, the engineers, the architects, everything. We kind of just come in almost like as like an owner's rep and be able to speak on their behalf. That's not something they do every day, kind of a good example of all the fun Title 24 laws in California, right? Well, one of our entities.
Well, we can explain that too. Like that's about energy efficiency and stuff, Title 24.
Right. They have very specific requirements for new construction buildings that come out, right? They have to be solar ready, and there's like day one, day two, different instances. So like, for instance, that particular architect was like, this is brand new, like really new. Well, how do we even create conceptual layouts for this? Like, what do we do? And they were kind of on hold and they had to go out to permit that month, so that's what I'm saying. We kind of step in with all of our knowledge on how to create a PV photovoltaic system. We understand from their perspective, like there's so many options, right? They had all this HVAC equipment on the roof, but they have to put this in or they can't literally build the building, right?
Uh-huh.
So we kind of got really creative. We're like, okay, so unless you move all your HVAC equipment to the floor, and the HVAC designer was like, no, you can't do that, then either we can build a platform to kind of put them on, we can put it on a carport, you know what I mean? Like kind of, again, like thinking out of the box, not so rigid, looking at the problem that they have and all of our knowledge We were able to give them a ton of different iterations and they kind of just brought that to the owner of the building and then they kind of made a decision, right? It's kind of like we bridge that gap.
Okay, great. So do sometimes people hire a consultant like yourself, engineering consultant, and also somebody that's going to be the engineer to do the drawings?
Right. And then we work with so many people in this industry, like we could take on pretty much the whole thing. We work with different design engineers and all these different things. So we could even bring that in house as like one package. And a lot of times too, like we'll kind of be the prime again, and then bring a design engineer in if that's what the project entails. Or, a lot of things which I think people don't realize too, especially with solar, which you would realize. But a lot of times, instead of bringing in like a structural engineer for like putting racking on a roof, like, if you're using panel claw or something, like they're going to do their own structural analysis and they're going to stamp and sign and seal that. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of go skip a little bit of steps and depending on the situation. And, a lot of times these manufacturers want to do it anyways. So your analysis would just be thrown away outright. So you can kind of get a little bit of efficiency and save some money there sometimes.
Cool. So instead of getting too focused on one little part of the project and things like that, you can coordinate, get people together, and then you can help people save money too by using, say, for instance, the racking manufacturer's engineering that comes with the racking instead of hiring out somebody else to do that, and maybe even help them select another engineer to do different parts of the project and things like that, so they don't, end up getting ripped off or going in the wrong direction, I guess. Great. Okay, cool. And are you mostly working on C&I, which stands for commercial and industrial, which usually means roof mount or ground mount that's maybe not more than a megawatt, something like that?
Yeah, commercial and industrial are basically our main clientele. The only kind of residential we would do is multifamily, where a larger type building.
So you're sticking with the three phase, no single phase for you.
You'd be surprised how many multifamily properties are single phase. I don't understand why, but yes.
Great. Okay. Well, good. Do you work with community solar at all, or that's more like giant utility scale sort of, or multi megawatts and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Mhm.
actually love community solar. Actually, the nonprofits I used to be in was Solar Austin a couple years ago, and that was a huge focus for us. Especially in Texas, that's kind of something we have as a lot of land, and it's really great. And sometimes, like when people were developing these communities, if you kind of go in with the thought of, well, okay, let's parcel out this land, and then this could power kind of this whole community, really works out excellently. But yeah, like all different types of solar and options.
So is the slogan for Austin, keep Austin weird? How come you don't seem very weird? Did you know that if you cut Alaska in half, that Texas would be the third largest state? So I don't think you're that big.
Yeah.
Speaking of, there's a lot of land up there, polar bears and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then the whole being in darkness for several months must be interesting. Not great for solar, right?
You compensate for it with your 24-hour days when you get far enough north. So,
That's true.
but your trackers might get tangled up and it just keeps going in the circle.
That must be such a strange place to live. It must be
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, I've done it before. So you took the NABCEP PV Design Specialist exam and you are NABCEP certified. And I think that's how we came into contact because you took my class. So thanks for taking my class. And do you remember how long ago that was? That's some years ago, I guess.
Think about 3 years.
Have you done the renewal yet? Have you had to do that?
I don't remember. Maybe
So
not.
that's at 3 years. You'd remember that. You're probably going to get some letter from NABCEP. And you have a class now at HeatSpring, I noticed.
Yeah.
What's that class?
So one of the other services we offer is actually called building energy modeling. So that's where you take like the architects and engineers drawings of any kind of commercial industrial building, and then you create like a 3D simulation of that building and you can kind of manipulate it for a lot of different reasons. A lot of utilities have requirements. You have to be a certain percentage better than their energy baseline. You can get incentives for that, sometimes like custom performance path. So that's where you'd have to make an energy model of these buildings. You can make a lot of money from it. So one of the programs that does that simulation is called eQuest, and it's extremely old and it has not been updated, but it really has just great bones for these applications. Like if you know what you're doing, you can really manipulate the program to give you really, really accurate results. So that's kind of what the training is about. It's how to use eQuest, especially if you've never used it before, showing the different detail and edit modes, the schematic design modes, and kind of walking you through what that looks like. And, there's even ways when you have like new improved systems like VRF, you can even incorporate that into this old software per se. But the good part about it is free and it's pretty much accepted by all utilities. I've never not seen it as an approved simulation software. Some others have like restrictions. So it's a good thing to learn.
I think you mentioned VRF. What is that?
Okay, so VRF is the variable refrigerant flow.
Oh,
It's the heating and cooling system that uses refrigerant to move heat from the environment to indoor units, right? So this is kind of like one of the new and upcoming energy conservation measures one might recommend. And we find as long as you install it correctly, it can be very beneficial and save you a lot of energy. But something like that, obviously, since eQuest hasn't been updated, could be kind of challenging if you're trying to get an accurate consumption on the site, what it's producing.
okay. So that variable refrigerant flow and eQuest is a software, and your class teaches people how to do all that. And what is the name of your class?
So the class is called Energy Modeling in eQuest.
Energy Modeling eQuest. And eQuest is a software, and you know how to do eQuest very well. So that's pretty awesome. And we will put the link to that class in the show notes so people don't have to go on a big long quest to figure out how to take that class. I also noticed that you have some other things that you have done, like you have some sort of education or certification as a HERS rater. Maybe you could explain what that is. I know that for a while there, we had to contact a HERS rater to come by in California to get the rebates. And so, what's a HERS rater? In fact, that sort of sounds like the name of your company because your website is HES, that's for Harris Energy Solutions, like HERS almost, rater, and it's HESconnect.com. So, what's a HERS rater?
Interesting you chose that cert. That's probably the one I use the least, but it's okay. Yeah, so this is actually provided from ResNet, which I know I just told you all of my clients are commercial, right? And here we are doing this residential energy savings network, which is what ResNet stands for.
Well, it's just like a credential, so it doesn't mean you have to do that. Like
Right.
when you go to college, you have to take English. I'm sure you took that class, but you don't have to use English every day, do you? No, I'm just kidding. Maybe Spanish.
That's a good point. There is a component of the HERS rating, which kind of also leads back to the modeling. It's a different type. Use different programs. Not you can't use eQuest, but those kind of look more on like if you have a multifamily facility and you're looking at like the individual units and what their score is. What is a HERS index? That's kind of a lot of questions.
Do you know what HERS stands for? HERS?
It is a home energy rating system rater.
Oh, home energy rating system. Okay, so I remember from some of these older rebates in California, we had to have somebody come in and, check out the house and make sure that it's energy efficient and it's probably the insulation. And were they doing blower door testing?
You do blower door testing, yeah, and make sure that the infiltration is, in this case, would be ResNet standards. But, probably in California, they probably even have more stringent ones. That happens a
Hmm.
lot here in Austin as well.
Yeah, so actually my daughter who works at a company, her name is Shaya, and I was just talking to her over the weekend. I was in Arizona visiting with her, and she works for a company. They call themselves mechanical, and they do air conditioning and heat pumps, and she's in the controls division, and they do all these different types of controls and like connecting things with the internet and using different brands like Schneider and Honeywell and all that kind of stuff. And we were talking about some of this stuff, and it was kind of interesting and how refrigerant works and all those types of things. It was kind of cool to talk to my daughter about all that kind of stuff. And she was talking about like when you walk into a building, if the door automatically wants to close or open, something's not right.
Yeah, the static pressure is off, right?
Yeah. And you don't really think too much of that until it happens, I guess, or at least the average person doesn't think too much about that.
It's really interesting. I definitely agree. It's almost like the buildings are almost like their own kind of living organism in a way, And when you do these models and stuff, a lot of times they take into account like, is there going to be natural ventilation? Like, are you going to be opening and closing your windows? Do you have operable windows? All these different things of the envelope, which I'm sure your daughter is kind of learning about, really plays a big part on kind of how it
Yeah.
functions and how people feel comfort when they're in it.
Yeah, and they do the big giant buildings. In fact, we went and saw the Rolling Stones over there, the big Coliseum with the roof that comes off, and it was kind of cool. But she was like, "Oh yeah, some of our people are here right now." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe you could get us backstage," because they're making sure that the controls work, so everybody doesn't run into a disaster in super hot Arizona with the Stones. Because I guess maybe at an event like that, each person is putting off 100 watts even at rest, and it kind of adds up when you have a stadium full of people. It's kind of cool.
Absolutely. That's where those great design engineers come in when they create these buildings, and to
Mhm.
fill all these CFM requirements. And
Yeah, I wonder how they calculated it too, where the roof moves back. It's like you're sitting there, the roof kind of starts moving back like a giant garage door. Pretty amazing.
definitely it's like inside, outside, like make up your mind, people. We actually did an energy model of, you ever seen one of those big sports, like, I don't want to call them domes, but they're like inflated 24/7, like these giant bubbles. They're like sports facilities for like
Yeah,
colleges and stuff.
indoor tennis or something
We
like that.
actually had to do a model for that. It's just
Uh-huh.
like, and they sit there and they have these fans that keep them up all the time, and they have the generators, so it definitely doesn't come down or anything. But it's pretty interesting. We're like, what would the tilt of that roof be? Because,
Uh,
different things you don't think you'd think about, and you have to kind of come up with.
So you know how to tie it all together. So one of the things that happens in the solar and storage industry is we get super focused on just doing solar or just doing solar and storage, and we kind of forget about, all the loads and all the kind of stuff that happens in the building and being energy efficient. And it was a lot more important too when solar was super, super expensive, or if you're off grid and stuff like that. And sometimes people are just like, I'll just get a bigger solar system and compensate for that. But it just seems like the easiest thing to do is to make your building more efficient. But I'm probably sitting in a house where some of the windows are single pane windows. And it would be nice to figure out, how to get that taken care of. It would be nice too if they had something like a PPA for upgrading your windows. I don't know, maybe they do. And I'm sure there's all kinds of incentives and things like that. But we kind of forget about that. And it'd be nice too if the solar people, when they're coming to put solar on your house, could also compensate for that. I just thought of something else too, is when somebody gets an electric vehicle, there might be going like, oh, I need to increase the size of my solar system, but also they could decrease their other energy usage, like decreasing their heating and cooling bill because of the windows or the insulation in the walls or the leaky ducts, or having the downstairs being super freezing when the upstairs is too hot. And I guess you can do some consulting for that kind of stuff too, I imagine.
Absolutely. That's a really great lead into basically 25% of what we do. It's really called an energy audit. And this is why I kind of like when we have our engineers, we like to cross train them as much as possible, because I feel like the more you know about energy efficiency in all of these sectors, the better of an engineer you are. And that's exactly the point. When a lot of times, like, we'll get like a really big, like, million-square-foot building, and they're like, let's cover the roof in solar. We want 100%, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how about if we just shoot for 70 to 80% of what your on-site consumption is? And then why don't we reduce the internal through energy efficiency upgrades? And you bring up such a good point, right? You can't do all this stuff outright. This stuff costs a lot of money. And that's where I think that consulting piece that I was mentioning earlier really ties in well, because it's like, well, you really need to break this up in phases, right? Windows, like you mentioned, are insanely expensive, right? We did it one project, it was like 500 years, right? Like, they don't pay themselves back. But it's like, what
And
are
some
your
people think solar modules are expensive, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. The only time that I did a window project that made sense was when we were closing some up for a data center. But yeah, it's breaking out what makes sense. Obviously the low hanging fruit in all audits are lighting, right? They're like no brainers. You switch them out, they're like 1 to 5 year paybacks, right? But your chiller is 35 years old, probably going to die in the next couple of years. So that's kind of where we come in, and we bring that real life looking at everything. Not only are you looking at occupant comfort, you're looking at what's the quickest way we can save energy in the most efficient way to not spend millions and millions of dollars. I don't know if you've priced anything out recently. It's absolutely insane. But, what new energy efficiency is most appropriate for this site? What is their real goal? Do they want occupant comfort to be number one? Do they just want that banner of I'm 100% solar. Do they want to be more resilient? I mean, all these things that kind of come through, there's so many reasons to go the energy efficiency route. And that's kind of a really cool thing. And everything we do is specific to each of these buildings, right? So it's almost like no two projects are the same. They could be similar, but you kind of have that fresh eyes approach. You're going to interview the facilities person, you're going to interview the stakeholders. You have to understand what are the overall goals. And another thing too is there's a ton of incentives. I mean, in a couple areas of this country, I can't even tell you like the millions of dollars we secured for people to just do energy efficient projects they were going to do anyways, right? So you really need to look at what's available, which they might not even know about, right? So it's kind of like being that almost that band-aid, like, how do we get this to work? Let's pull it all together. But you bring up such a good point. Like everyone always sometimes, oh, let's just attack my consumption. Well, why don't we reduce it? You know, like you're going to replace your chiller anyways. Like this an absorption chiller makes sense. Can we tie different HVAC upgrades together where it makes sense and get you a better system, more occupant comfort, and will save you energy. And you'll probably get an incentive for, right? So it's kind of fun. No 2 days are the same.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. So those incentives, it sounds like somebody could hire you as a consultant and you can find those incentives for them. And are they federal? Are they state? I guess probably a combination. And do you also look them up in the same places where you look up the solar incentives? So that's like the Desire website, as they call it, database of state incentives for renewables and efficiencies, DSIREUSA.org. That's where a lot of people look for solar incentives. And I see that there's so many other incentives in there too that you don't know which one to go for. And in the solar industry, we kind of just know what to go for because we just hear it from our friends, but we could also find it there. Do you find yourself over there on that website a lot, or you're kind of an expert at finding all of these different incentives? There's, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act incentives that are probably covering a lot of that stuff, but there's probably other things too.
Yeah, you hit two great ones. I mean, if you haven't really looked into the Inflation Reduction Act, it's probably one of the biggest legislative changes for our industry. Sometimes when I get sad, I just go look at it because it's just amazing that this is happening in my lifetime. Just so much money,
Yeah,
even
it
down.
probably puts therapy out of business. Just go read the Inflation Reduction Act. Also can put you to sleep, gets rid of all those insomnia doctors.
You did mention that I wasn't weird, right? I guess that negates that. But there are all different levels, federal, state. I kind of mentioned before utility as well. Sometimes utility levels, like whatever territory you are typically in, deregulated or regulated. There's also different things like we kind of talked about the models. There's federal one called 179D, where actually, again, you create that model of your building and you can get credit for HVAC, you can get credit for lighting and your envelope. There's different costs per square foot for that. That's a tax reduction. You mentioned the Desire is constantly changing. One of the things I do recommend is that this stuff changes often. And a lot of times, some of these utility programs or state programs, they'll release them. They're incredible, but then they will fill up in like a couple of weeks, like it's good to get a pulse on what's coming out. If they have kind of like larger funding, I don't know if you've ever dealt with NYSERDA before. That's a New York based incentive that's just incredible. They do everything from help fund audits, different types, commissioning, energy audits, which I mentioned.
And that stands for New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA.
Yeah, I mean, they even provide funding for farms. That's probably one of the coolest audits we do. They're very, very high. When they come out in the company, everyone tries to go to them, whether it's a cow farm or mushroom farm. Or, I mean, if you look at Energy Trust of Oregon has some really good incentives for studies. Same thing with Illinois. But the one thing I did want to mention to your original point is that these are ever changing. Sometimes programs open up. I just dealt with one in the CPS territory. They had a solar incentive program. I think we had one of the last ones that went through for that for one of my clients. You have to really stay on top of it. You have to really understand like when you have to submit for the stuff, sometimes they literally open up and close within a week. So this is kind of what I'm saying. This is why an energy consultant is so great. So how could you possibly stay on top of all this and know where to look, right? Because even though you have that desire and that's great, some of these are federally funded. If you're a federal facility, you don't have access to them. So it's just so many things jumbled into one. Just even watching a couple of videos about the IRA, or definitely the desire one, is great as well, as you mentioned. So
So you mentioned CPS. I know there's an inverter company. Is that,
no, it's CPS Energy.
oh, CPS Energy is,
It is a utility in the San Antonio area,
oh, okay,
municipal electric utility. I think they've been around for quite some time, 1940s.
great.
They had a pretty good solar rebate program that we definitely got for our client. But I just use that as an example because that was something that we were able to secure during the time period, but it had closed, right? So these programs, they always have a goal, right? They're trying to reduce energy or a certain kind of target that they develop these programs off. So it really helps to kind of just make sure you know when it's opening and closing.
So one of the things that I'm interested in, especially lately, just for my own reasons, is growing my company. And you're only able to work so many hours per day, and hiring people and giving people decision-making roles and all that kind of stuff, because as you grow, you can only be so big. So you start off by yourself, and then you get bigger and bigger, and you hire one person and you're like, man, can I really afford this person? And then you get to a point where, do you hire an expensive person that is really good, or do you try to save money? And so how has it been for you? You're obviously a good entrepreneur, I could just tell, and I'm pretty impressed by you. And you have all these engineers working for you, and you have to coordinate all that. Like, do you do a lot of the engineering yourself? Personally, for myself, I have to do like things that are really technical and curriculum making, and I do sort of sub out. Like, I have Bill Brooks and Johan Olfson in some of my classes and things like that. But how has that been for you, growing your company? Do you have any advice for people and advice for me so I can have 23 people too?
You sure you want 23 people? No, I'm just kidding.
I want to be so prime. Well, I think maybe if I include myself, I'm at 6, and not including subcontractors and things like that.
So I actually do get asked that a lot, that exact question. I don't really do that like most people. It's pretty funny. One of the mentors of mine, when I opened up the firm about 8 years ago, he was like, do you want to build it to sell? Do you want to build it so it just finances your life? Like you'll be comfortable doing that? Or do you want to build it and have it be your career forever? And I can't say I've picked one. Obviously not the second one. I know this sound kind of cheesy, but like I've always tried to grow organically. I have all these ideas. You can ask any of my executive team, they roll their eyes probably out of their heads, how we can expand. We actually have strategic sessions every year of what areas should we be getting into, how big should we be getting? I originally was like, yes, 10 people, that will do it. And then we hit 10 and then all of a sudden we're at 15. I'm like, okay, I guess we're probably going to hit 20, huh? I always just get very concerned, like, how the volatile nature of owning a business is. I never want to grow to a point where I'd have to let go people. That's like my
Mhm.
greatest fear, right? And I think I kind of make a lot of my decisions with that in mind. And also another thing that I think I do different, at least I think I do, is we're a service industry. You're the same, right? So we're not like making widgets or anything. My people are the company. And how do you attract good people? And especially the last 2 years, I've really hit this hard. Like as I start to get longer, bigger, better contracts, I'm trying to offer really, really attractive things for my employees. Like for instance, we even have our own like profit sharing pension plan. Like how many consultants have that, right? We do 3% 401k. Some of my people don't even want that. They want to do the IRA. It's whoever their financial advisor says. It's like, well, I'm just going to add one to you. I'm going to create it for you. Like, I want you to have a future. I don't want you to work forever. We recently started covering medical, dental, vision. So it's like I'm kind of growing, but in my head, again, I don't want to grow too much where we put ourselves at risk for, potentially having months where we're underwater and all that stuff. You can't have that. But when I do grow and I do have success, parcel off some of that and give it back to my people. That has been definitely always on my mind. And other cool things I think of. We try to do an annual retreat too. One of the things I think also we're different is we're remote. I know you live that life
Mhm.
as well as
Yeah.
traveling. It's definitely different. And, we've definitely caught a lot of employees in the past not really working all the time, when they have that freedom, maybe abusing it a bit. But you kind of mentioned too, like, how do you structure that? How do you bring in very expensive people? And I think it's pretty funny you say that, because we're staring down right now two pretty big hires that we have just banged our heads around, like, does it make sense? Doesn't make sense. But when you get to a point, and I think the number is 23, because you want to make sure you have that mid-level management. You want to make sure that your clients are completely, they get that still the same level of attention they had when we were 10. And that involves bringing on really skilled and talented people. So I think we're definitely making some big moves with that. Obviously, I have to give a call out to Dang. I brought him on about 3 years ago. He took a pretty big risk on a 1.5 person for leaving a very, very safe government job. But I think he just believed in what we could do. And it's just been crazy, taking my experience and my network and his network and just making that make sense. And what's kind of cool, what kind of happens when you do that is to get good clients. I think bad clients can kill a company. We've actually made some decisions over the last year too to remove some that we've had forever. At one point, prop my entire company up. It felt awful, but I'm a different company now. That so you have to grow. You have to
Hmm.
grow. You have to take care of your people. And like you said, sometimes you do have to kind of take the plunge. If you believe in this person, and we've gotten it wrong, trust me, but just you kind of got to take a little bit of leap of faith. I know some owners say, like, when you have 3 times their salary, you can bring them on. If I did that, I'd be dead.
What was that again? If you have 3 times their salary?
Yeah, like basically, if you have the work of 3 times their person's salary, then go ahead and hire that person. And I'm like, seems like
Huh.
that's a little bit of a gray area. I look for more like 1.5, maybe, because you got to imagine when they come in, they will bring in their own work, right?
Well, you're definitely an entrepreneur and you're definitely successful at it. And you do see a lot of people that get degrees, whether it be engineering or medical doctors or whatever it is, and they're super smart people, but they're just not good at running businesses and they might run them into the ground. And so, what's your trick? Do you have a business degree?
No.
But you could probably go teach business, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I was thinking about that, but let me do it for a couple of years, maybe
Uh-huh.
at 25 years, I'll be like, okay,
Yeah.
I think I know enough.
The one thing that makes you sound different from other people that I've talked to is you're just like, I don't want to hire so many people, so I would have to lay somebody off. Like, I mean, you're going to lay somebody off if they're stealing money or something like that, or, doing something really bad. But a lot of people in business school are just like, that's the way it goes. And we are on the solar coaster. However, the solar coaster, from what I've seen, is a lot smoother if you're working across different states. So if somebody was just like focusing on residential California solar, that net metering three thing, or if it's net metering at all, it would have knocked them for a loop. And so one of the things about me is I'm teaching all over the place. So even outside of the US, I have business. It's a little bit smoother, but then, you do have things like the Inflation Reduction Act and elections, and people get scared about that kind of stuff too, and all these incentives, and are they going to be around? And that makes things just a little bit different on that solar coaster. But it seems that your business too is seeing multiple states. I do see too that there's people that are entrepreneurs and they're like you and I, and they prefer to be on a little bit more of a roller coaster and have multiple clients instead of having a job where you work for one person and it's like having one client. You work for like a company and that's the way it is.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points there. And that's actually one of the things I didn't mention. And I'm glad you reminded me. So you're talking about for you, you go across different states. You have kind of like, you don't have that limitation of being in one state, one service area, right? That's another thing we do. I kind of said the consultants, and I've kind of hit upon a couple of them. Like we have like four main pillars. Solar's one of them, right? Building energy modeling is one, audits is one, commissioning is one, right? So when you have four areas of which you can bring in work, right? And then training is actually another one, nothing compared to you, John, but
Huh.
there's these five sectors that we are constantly trying to get work on. If you put all your eggs in one basket, I mean, if I put all of mine in solar, there would have been like several months in this 8 years I had nothing, but then I had months where I had more than I could even handle, right? you kind of mentioned that roller coaster, but when you have such a diverse area of services you offer, I think that really helps kind of reduce that. We actually trying to get like bigger, larger clients. That's one of the things I'm like, well, what happens when we get them? Then they're going to be like, whatever percent of our overall revenue, and it's like, oh, that's scary too. Then you almost become chained to them, become vulnerable. So how do you kind of counteract that? Like obviously you want bigger, larger, long-term projects. That's like every energy consultant's dream. But how do you counteract that and make sure you still are diverse in your other tasks? So I think that's kind of, I do it in services as you kind of do in location. And then another interesting thing might be worth mentioning right now is one of my other mentors mentioned that energy is kind of recession proof, right? And I think what he meant by that was that when things are going good, you have all these incentives, people want to do the right thing. Oh, okay, let's build that solar array we were talking about, or, let's upgrade the system because we have this great cash flow, blah, blah, blah. But then what happens when things get tight? What happens when your energy bill is off the charts and you're looking to save money? Then you're also looking at how do you reduce? You know what I mean? So I thought that was kind of a brilliant thing. And I don't know if that'll always hold true, but I do think even that you kind of mentioned like the elections, like in some cases it doesn't really matter, like either you're doing like the right thing or you want to be more efficient or you want to save energy and you want to save it badly and you're going to kind of figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I've kind of noticed that my career too is almost the opposite. I mean, it's recession proof, but it even swings the other way. So when there's some sort of recession or fear, there's people that are otherwise comfortable in their jobs and they're like, oh, I better go get that certification so I'm the one that doesn't get laid off. And so I've seen things too, like with COVID, it was like it really increased my business. The time around when there was like that 2008, 2009 thing, it was really good for the solar training business. And also, when there is something like a recession, there's usually incentives to stimulate the economy and things like that too that help out, get things going.
I think another topic that comes up a lot for me, and I guess kind of what worries me is, a lot of people are pushing like decarbonization, they're pushing EV cars, they're pushing heat pumps, so these are they're pretty exciting for our career. So there's a couple things going on. So we have microgrids, decarbonization. So a lot of times we're asked to do studies like this for certain sites. So it's the reduction or elimination of carbon dioxide emissions from a process such as manufacturing and production of energy. So when you're looking at that on the building level, a lot of times the answer is to shift to electric, get off coal, get off gas, switch everything over to electric so then it can be fueled by low emitting carbon or solar or all these different things, right? So it's exciting for us for these different studies, but it kind of also ties into a lot of our suggestions also. In order to do that, sometimes you have to put in a heat pump.
A heat pump. Yeah, sure. I always think of a heat pump as sort of like you take your air conditioner and you flip it around.
Exactly. Yep. That's
And then there's a ground source heat pump where in the cold of winter, you can take the heat out of underground, which is kind of a weird concept.
It's absolutely like flipping it. So it's like your refrigerator. Heat pumps use electricity to transfer heat from a cool place to a warm space, making the cool space cooler and the warm space warmer, right? But it also is very heavily on electric use, right? But for decarbonation studies, it's like the perfect pairing. You're like, yeah, here we go. We're going to switch over.
Yeah, I think they say it takes about a third of the electricity to make the same amount of heat
Exactly. Yep.
as a resistance heater.
So
Yeah.
you can see why these suggestions are a great energy saver.
And great with the IRA. Woohoo, heat pump, IRA benefits. Check it out.
Absolutely. Another great point. But then also look at the electric vehicle charging, how many more chargers are being installed, how many more people are going electric, which is great. I'm not saying these things aren't amazing movement. I love all of it, but it also has me slightly concerned when you start to think about the grid and which is very archaic all across the country. And now you're having all this additional load, which, hopefully the next phase will be to make them cleaner, but like, are we going to be blowing up transformers everywhere? Like do we even have the labor force required to do this and great changes? Can people to come in and actually install these correctly? You even talked about the VRF in the beginning, right? Like all these are different new technologies. And how is this all going to play out? You talk to the utility companies like, oh, of course, we're ready. We got this. But when reality, part of me is a little concerned what this means. I think it's great. I love the idea of moving electric. I'm also a pretty big proponent of hydrogen. That's also another big part of the IRA as well. Like how can we shape this to where we don't overflood, where it makes sense, but also as quickly as possible, right? It's very exciting. It makes coming to work very exciting every day. But these different components are very exciting, but I'm worried. And as we train and we kind of grow and we do projects, we keep this in our head. Like, how is this going to work? We talk to people and especially at like conferences and stuff like, hey, have you thought about this? Has your transformers blown up from all these EV chargers you're adding? And especially when you're talking about electrifying fleets like buses and even planes, what is that going to look like? And should we be thinking of alternate ideas?
Yeah, and those transformers are kind of hard to come by these days too.
Absolutely. The cost of
Maybe
everything after COVID has just really been.
maybe we should start a transformer manufacturing company. Let's do it.
I know. I even thought like when the first, I don't know if you remember the power cells for Tesla, I was like, man, I should just get a warehouse of these and just sell them. And I'll be don't have to work.
Great.
If you can acquire them, right? If you could have them on hand, you could really be successful there when they were first coming out.
Okay. And just one thing is like when you talked about energy audits and stuff like that, change the name. Nobody wants to get audited. It sounds like that's something that has to do with the IRS. So just
Oh,
get,
I like that. That's a good point.
yeah, I mean, people might not know what you're talking about too. And it's kind of interesting history too, is that's how heat spraying got their start. There was some kind of like, I don't know, was it called BPI, Building Performance Institute or something like that? And they were doing training for that. And then they started doing solar too, and they were doing in-person stuff. And then they decided to just do online. And now I think mostly they're doing solar and all that kind of stuff. But you're kind of can also go back to their roots and people could go there and they could take your class and they could take my classes. And I know that you took my class and you got your NABCEP certification, so people can do that too and follow in your footsteps and start big businesses and get huge amounts of engineers. I always think of how many letters that is too. So if the engineers have EE after their name and you had 23 of them, that would be 46. And that's like DNA. There's 23
Hmm.
pairs, like
Hmm.
23 and me. So there's 46. So you could go think you got 46 legs working for you and 46 arms, 46 index fingers, pretty amazing. Well, unless somebody had an accident, maybe somebody's missing a
Oh,
finger.
geez.
And
Oh, man.
you got to be open-minded. There's all kinds of stuff going on out there, but it's pretty cool. All the things that you're doing, that you have all these engineers working for you, and we will put links and figure out how to send people your way. But maybe you already have too much business. It sounds like you're just hiring people after people. And then you get to a point where you're just running a business and you don't have to do engineering. But I do think it's super important that people that run the business know how it works. Like I have a friend that has a law firm, but he also is a lawyer. And there's a lot of people that are in the solar industry, or I should say that there's boards that end up hiring some like really good CEO that doesn't know anything about solar. And then there goes the business, like because they don't understand all the basics. So I recommend that everybody out there get some consulting, get some education, know how things work before they jump in too far.
Absolutely. That's a great advice. Yeah. And that is something I did. I worked part-time for a while. I worked several jobs when I first started the company. Like everyone always thinks like you need to just boom, be like full time, but sometimes that takes time. You have to tap your number, you have to set up your LLC, you have to like rush, be quick, but don't hurry, that kind of deal. But yeah, like definitely do your research, know your stuff.
Yeah, I imagine like my life could have been a lot different. Like how I ended up teaching all these classes. I didn't go into it planning to teach. It was just like there was a teaching job and I took it. One thing led to another, and here I am. It evolved, and now I have a company, but it's sort of like what is a company? There's a lot of different types of companies. Sometimes a company is one person, sometimes working part-time could be a company, one person. And sometimes a company is some huge thing on the stock market. And so these one person companies, they're the CEO, they're the janitor, they're the whole thing. So, and they're just different entities. And also sometimes one person doesn't have to start a company, and it makes it a little bit easier to do taxes, and they just put it under their name. Like I could be doing that too. And you could be doing that too also. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing you should become knowledgeable of. What is the different types of companies? Like which
mm-hmm.
fits your needs best, you know? We just changed to an S corp. That's because that's what my accountant said.
Great. I'm a C Corp, and
Nice.
you were an LLC before, I guess.
Yep.
So, and then you could also just be a sole proprietor. I've done that too, where I had a business and I had many people working for me back in my previous life before solar was the big thing. And I was just a sole proprietor and, having all these different people working for me. So cool. Well, anything else, Jessica?
No, just think
Yeah.
that you're awesome, Sean. And
Oh, you're
yeah,
awesome too. And it was always good meeting up with you at those conferences and things like that. I'm sure we'll do some of that again. And thanks a lot, Jessica Harris of Harris Energy Solutions. And where can people find you when they need some special engineering consulting for their big solar projects for commercial and industrial C&I?
just call our main line. We'll help you.
All right, so check it out. And that's hesconnect.com. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to Solar, SEAN. That's solarshawn.com.